Well, welcome everyone to the third episode of my new podcast, Pug, Fireball, and Company, which is short for the book I just have out about Des Moines professional baseball history. So today I'm talking with John Liepa, the noted Iowa baseball historian, collector, and author. I got to know John through my association with the Society for American Baseball Research, the Field of Dreams chapter in Des Moines. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon, Steve.
Please share with us your background. Where are you from and where did you go to school?
Well, a lot of people don't know this about me, Steve, but I'm an immigrant, and English was my third language. I was born in a displaced persons camp at the end of World War II in northern Germany. I'm not German. My background is Latvian. My parents were forced to flee during the war. My father fought in World War II, and after the Allies took northern Germany, they welcomed in some of the people that had been forced to flee from the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Estonia. And so I was born in February of 1945, just a few months before the war ended. And there were still planes going overhead and everything. Germany hadn't surrendered, not until May. And so, anyway, my first 4.5 years were living in this displaced persons camp in northern Germany, near a little village called Hahn, in the province of Oldenburg. And then our family, like a lot of families, even here in Iowa during the 1970s, we were sponsored by a small Lutheran church up in northwest Iowa, a little town called Ringstead, Iowa. And they sponsored our family to come over here. And by that time, I had two older brothers that were born in Latvia, and I and my younger brother were both born in the camp. And then after we came to the United States, my sister was born. So there are 5 kids totally. And we lived near Ringstead. My father could speak a number of languages, but the one he needed, he couldn't speak English. So there was a lovely Norwegian family up there that basically hired him to work on the farm. And, he could do that without having to worry about languages and so on. And so for a few years, we lived up there, and I didn't go to school yet. It was still before the age of kindergarten. But anyway, my father found out about a better paying job at the John Deere plant in Ankeny, Iowa. And so while the rest of the family stayed in Northwest Iowa, he came down here 5 days a week and had a small apartment and worked in the John Deere plant, just a physical labor job, and eventually made enough so we could buy a small house on the east side of Des Moines. And I finally get to answering your question about where did I go to school. I My elementary schools, there were two of them. Adams School on East 29th, off of Euclid Avenue. That's where I started school. And by that time, my English was improving pretty dramatically. I still had a young kid accent. And then most of my elementary school was we moved to near the Drake area. And I went to Monroe Elementary School on 30th and Hickman. And with my brothers, we were all into sandlot football, sandlot baseball, and we all had paper outs. And a lot of the paper out money went towards comic books and baseball cards and football cards. And, that's spent a lot of our profits there. But that's where the love affair with baseball began. And then after that, I went to Franklin Junior High School, which no longer is a junior high school, on 48th and Franklin. And then eventually I went to Roosevelt High School here in Des Moines, and graduated there in 1963. And by that time, my love of sports was deeply ingrained. I played basketball in high school. I ran track. I just enjoyed it. I played tennis and won some awards with the Parks and Rec in Des Moines and so on. And my brothers were athletic too. One of my brothers, two older brothers, went to Des Moines North High School, and one of my brothers was a good swimmer. The other one played some football and so on. And so it was just part of a family thing that we played, a lot of sports. But my family didn't have a lot of money when we were young, so we were pretty much restricted to sandlot sports. They couldn't afford the uniforms or the travel costs involved with, other families could for their kids. But that didn't stop. After I graduated from Roosevelt in '63, I went to Iowa State, and I would get undergraduate, graduate degrees there and start postgraduate work there. And at Iowa State, I continued to play intramural sports. I played on the initial rugby team at Iowa State in 1969. I played a lot of racquetball and squash. We won some awards for intramural track. I basically stopped playing baseball for a while, but my interest in baseball didn't stop. And then in 1971, after I finished my degrees in history and political science, a part-time position opened up for teaching on the Boone campus of Des Moines Area Community College. And I went over there to replace a friend of mine who was leaving to go to Europe with her husband, who was on sabbatical from Iowa State. And what I thought would be a 1 year job, Susan came back from Europe and had a change of heart about wanting to continue teaching. It ended up being a 38-year career teaching. And at Iowa State, 2 years as a teaching assistant, and then 38 years at DMAC, so a total of 40 years. And I taught a number of history and political science courses when I started out, and one of them was, Iowa history. And the Iowa history course, one of the things I found out in a lot of the textbooks, a lot of them had shortcomings, but very few of them talked about, the role sports played in Iowa history. And I, by that time, was pretty serious about collecting baseball cards. And as my two children, who are now adults, and I have 5 grandkids, as they were growing up, we put together a lot of the Topps and Bowman and Fleer sets. And we had complete sets from 1948 through about 1980, including a lot of regional sets and so on. And then a lot of that was from our paper out days. And what happened is in all those years, as my brothers, got older, my mom kept asking who wants the baseball cards, and they kept saying no to their regret later. And my mom finally said, "Well, you probably have the most interest in sports. Why don't you just take them?" And it was a great big old apple box full of thousands of baseball cards from the early 50s through the early 60s. And there were 7 Mickey Mantle cards in there from 1957. And my favorite set was the 56 Topps and the 53 Bowman. And, when I started teaching again, I think my first 9 month salary was something like $7,000 a year for a full time job. And, but the more I studied, Iowa history, the more I took an interest in baseball history and sports history generally. And I started doing research. And like you, I joined SABR back in I think it was 86. And by that time, I'd already written some articles about baseball. And, I was asked to write articles by the Iowa Cubs, Scott Saylor, who worked for Michael Gardner, when they had a yearbook that they published. And I wrote 2 articles of 1,000 words or less I think, for about 8 years. So that's 16 articles. And then I wrote a number of articles on baseball history for the Iowa History Journal, Michael Schwinger. And I've written quite a few articles and helped a lot of people like you who are working on their own baseball projects with items from my collection, pictures from my collection. So it's kind of a long story, but it's been a gradual progression, and my interests even in baseball have changed. As I completed these sets, that got kind of boring, and the newer cards didn't interest me. And so what I started doing, and this is quite a while ago, 30 years ago, I started researching how many Iowans, native born, had made it to the major leagues. And when I started researching, it was maybe about 150 or 60. And now it's 227 the last time I looked. And I thought, well, that'd be an interesting way to collect if I collected cards of just Iowans. And there are 7 in the Hall of Fame, and I can touch on that a little bit later. So I started collecting both the Hall of Famers and the non-Hall of Famers. And that's what I've been doing for about the last 25 years, not limited just to baseball cards, even though some of those are valuable and expensive. I've collected a lot of photos and so on over the years. I have a lot of autographed items, bats, balls, and so on. And I have an extensive library. I think everyone that you and I know probably that loves baseball, I probably have 500 baseball books at least, including some very old from the 19th century. And so the way that I've collected and my interests, they've changed, but the love of baseball has never changed. So that's a little bit about the background.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I've used some of John's material. The pictures, some of the pictures that are in my latest book he supplied. So, and he's done some proofreading for me. So yeah, he's been instrumental in my baseball endeavors. And as a side note, I found out that we have another connection family wise. He is a classmate of my cousin Jim Freeland, who now lives in Florida. He's lived down there for many years, but I think they were in the same graduating class. At least they both went to Roosevelt High School.
Yeah, so yeah, Steve. Jim was a friend of mine, And until you told me that, I had no idea that you guys were related. But he also played that. He also played basketball. He's taller, and he was a good friend through high school. And then basically we sort of reconnected, I think, at a couple of the class reunions, still not knowing that you were related to him. And then I think after you moved here, either through Sabre or after you moved to West Des Moines, then you told me that you actually was a cousin. And Jim, he's an avid sportsman. He hunts and he owns property in southern Iowa. And occasionally when he comes back, we get in touch with each other. So he's remained a friend. He didn't come back for our 60th class reunion last fall. I helped organize that. He was supposed to be here, and I was looking forward to it. But I'm not sure if something came up that conflicted. But he wasn't able to be here. So
I don't hold me to it, but I think he might have pitched in the state. Well, no, they didn't have the state tournament at Princeville back then, did they?
no, they didn't.
Baseball tournament.
And yeah, he did play, but I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But he was an athlete. I got to know the athletes at Roosevelt fairly well, especially the basketball players and some of the baseball players. So
He swears there's a bar down in southern Iowa that's founded by an ex-major leaguer or who had a lot of minor league experience. I forget the name of the bar or the town. Maybe you're aware of it. It's straight south of here.
well, I am. Yeah, it's in Mount Ayr.
Mount Ayr, that's it. Yeah.
And yeah, and I think his name was a kind of a nickname like Shorties or something like that.
Yeah.
And Jim told me his name, and I don't know him, but I did some research after I found out his real name. He's not a native born Iowan, so I don't have a file on him. And I don't think I'm missing, according to Baseball Reference and a lot of the other resources, I don't think I'm missing any names from those that were actually born in Iowa. One of the things that's a little bit tricky, though, is there are a number of major league players that were born in hospitals, either in Omaha or if they live close to the Missouri border, in a very small Iowa town. They were actually born in a hospital in Missouri, but and even the three major leaguers from Norway, Iowa, only one of them was born in Norway. The other two were born in Cedar Rapids. And so trying to find out, a lot of them claim their birthplace as Iowa. And that's what I go by, when I'm adding to my collection. So.
Well, okay. You've answered some of my next questions. How would you describe today's market for collecting sports memorabilia? And is it a good investment today?
Well, the way to answer that is there are different ways of collecting. And I think those of us that have been in the hobby as long as I have, we have fairly strong opinions about it. And I think a lot of you are aware that they have this Bitcoin, phenomena, I'll call it that. But a lot of that, the Tom Brady football cards soared in price, but I would argue not in value. And now they're trying to dump them. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I know one of the people you're going to be interviewing is Randy Wayhofer, and from the Iowa Cubs. And Randy asked me years ago about, giving him a sort of an appraisal on some of the cards he has. Because he has, I think it's 2 or 3 girls, and they might be college age now or even older. But, Randy, questions I always ask people, and let me backtrack. One of the articles I wrote for the Iowa Cubs was on how to collect baseball cards. And I told Randy, I said, what are your oldest cards? And he said, well, probably from the 1970s. And I said, nothing newer than about 1976, which includes the George Brett rookie and the Robin Yount rookie, won't hold their value unless they're in just mint condition. Mm-hmm. And a Michael Jordan rookie in mint condition, a Ricky Henderson, a Cal Ripken, those hold their value. But they've got to be, in one of the grading services, Professional Sports Authenticators, they have a scale of 1 to 10. Mm-hmm. And if the difference between a 10, a Ricky Henderson sold for over $100,000, a 9, you're lucky to get $10,000. And, an 8, you might get $2,000. There's no shortage of those cards. And I think one of the problems, and the reason that I collect older cards, is I don't think a lot of the newer stuff will hold its value. A lot of it is marketing hype and, packs of cards. Young kids can't afford them anymore. They're charging $7 a pack, $8 a pack. And here's what I always tell people that are card collectors. When you go into, if you've got a bunch of newer cards, go into a hobby shop that sells baseball cards and ask them if they would want to buy some of your newer cards that you brought there 10 years ago. And I'll bet you that every one of them tells you, well, I have enough in my inventory. They're being polite to you. That means they can't get rid of them. And, so what I've always advised young kids, including my own, is that if you have a favorite team or your dad had a favorite team and you learned about baseball through him, and I'll use you as an example, Steve. If you're a big Iowa Cubs fan or Chicago Cubs fan, I still encourage kids, buy an off-condition Ernie Banks card. That's going to be a much better investment than buying a 2024 set that's overpriced and won't hold, or select certain players that you like. They don't have to be superstars. Sometimes they can be, players that were close to getting into the Hall of Fame but didn't quite make it. Maybe they're on the ballot a number of years in a row. Collect because of your love of baseball, not because you think you're going to make a ton of money off of that with the newer cards. And I'll give you another example, and I won't name names, but I had a gentleman that was involved with Adventureland years ago, and he was a young boy. His father invited me in because they knew I knew a lot about baseball cards. And I shared some of the same things I'm sharing with you right now about collecting cards. And I found out later that his only interest it wasn't in baseball. It was trying to make a bunch of money by buying a bunch of cards. And that's the wrong reason to get into the hobby. What you find out too is that a lot of the guys that sell baseball cards know very little about the history of the game. They don't know a lot about, they're not saber people. They're just in it to try and make money and flip a card real quick, buy it, sell it, and and I'm not, whatever your reasons are for getting into the hobby, that's fine. But it's worked with me. I've been incredibly lucky because I always encourage people. I've brokered a lot of collections, six-figure collections, and I always educate the people that I'm going to be selling the cards or helping sell the cards for. I have them track auctions so they know with their cards. I tell them all about the grading services and how important that is. And even when the auction's going on, I have them follow the auction with their cards in it right up until the auction closes. And I explain the rules to them in an auction. That most auction houses put $20 on top as a consignment fee, and they have different policies on what percentage they pay you. And I found out that honesty is the best way to work with people. I mean, it sounds old fashioned, but it really does work. I've had a lot of people call me. I just sold a bunch of cards for a retired Drake Law professor, and and I've done that a lot. I know where there's some fabulous collections here in Iowa. They're not yet ready to sell, but they're pretty close. And sometimes 20 years after I meet someone to see their collection, I get a call out of the blue, and they'll say, "John, I'm ready to sell. I need your help." And so, collecting cards, I think the key is, why are you in the hobby? Educate yourself about the hobby. I'll give you one example. Years ago, I was at a small show in Adventureland, and it was maybe 20, 25 dealers, not a real big room. And a young kid, maybe in his early 20s, came in, and he had a stack of cards. They were called M1014s from 1915. And most of the dealers in the room thought they were basically reprints. They thought they were fakes. And the kid had permission to sell the cards from the family. He wanted to buy a motorcycle. And he knew that he got some good advice from a family member. Don't be in a rush to sell them to the first or second guy that offers you a price. And so two of us knew that little stack of cards was, first of all, real. And secondly, it had a Babe Ruth rookie card in it. And it had a Ty Cobb card in it. And it had a Hannes Wagner card in it. And at the end of a show, everyone in that room adds up their totals. How much did it cost for the wife and kids at Adventureland? How much for the motel room? Did I make any money selling cards? And most of the guys, because they didn't have old cards, they didn't have a very good show. This other guy that knew that it was real didn't have a very good show. And so he came back to me, and we didn't have to do a lot of dickering. I said, what would make you happy? And for that little stack of cards. And I'll just tell you right now that I paid him around $1,000 for the stack. And this is years ago, 30 years ago. And I sat on that Ruth rookie card. He's a skinny pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. And I sat on that card. When I went to shows, I had it right in the front of my display cases, under glass, under lock and key, but it's clearly said not for sale. It was my hook to get people to come to my table. And they came. And I don't know how many little kids, a parent would ask, it was in a hardcover and everything, the card was. how many parents would ask, could I take a picture of my son or daughter holding that Babe Ruth rookie card? And I said, absolutely. A lot of kids over the years did that. And I was glad to do that. And then eventually, as a historian, I knew that in the year 2015, the 100th anniversary of Babe Ruth's rookie card, that the value of that card would soar. And so what I did is I had my wife, I put on my 1869 replica uniform of the first Iowan to play professionally, Calvin McVeigh from the Cincinnati Red Stockings. And I held my autographed Babe Ruth ball, which I still have in one hand, that rookie card of Babe Ruth in the other hand, and I had them take pictures. And then I put it into a nationwide auction with a company called Mile High Card Company. And my card was on the cover of this nationwide auction. It was lot number one, which is the dream of anyone selling a valuable card. And the card that I bought for $1,000 sold for nearly 90,000. And that money went to grandkids and to help my kids with tuition.
Wow.
And I've been able to do that a couple times. But the lesson in all that is be patient, don't be greedy, educate yourself, know the hobby, be honest with the people you're working with, both on the seller side and the person that you're helping sell the cards, and you're gonna come out all right. You're gonna come out all right. A lot of times, instead of taking my 15 to 20% in money after they covered my expenses, if I had to travel, I would take cards from the collection and add it to my collection. And I was able to add some valuable cards that at the time I might not have been able to afford. And so that's how I build it, and I continue to do that. So my collection of Iowa cards.
Speaking of baseball cards, when you were a boy, did you put cards in the spokes of your bicycle wheels like a lot of kids did?
Mostly Dodgers. Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale and Carl Falillo and Carl Erskine all met their fate in my bicycle spokes. They were the nemesis to my Yankees in the 1950s.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, they were the enemy. So, how does one value determine the value of a baseball card?
Uh, there are 4 or 5 major considerations. One is who's on the card, and begin with the superstars that are in the Hall of Fame. And I've just mentioned Babe Ruth, and obviously cards like Roberto Clemente, the Honus Wagner card, any Mickey Mantle card, Jackie Robinson's card, the pioneers in baseball. The players from the 19th century that are in the Hall of Fame.
I think we froze up.
So who's on the card is probably the single most important thing. And it has to be a genuine card. There's a lot of counterfeits out there, and you have to know what you're doing in terms of card stock, in terms of everything from trimming. You've got to catch counterfeits. And the other thing is the scarcity of the card. The first thing I said was who's on it, and then other major considerations is even if it is a beat up card of Babe Ruth. When I say beat up, multiple creases, it still sells for $50,000 to $100,000, sometimes more. And you've got to if you have tears on the card or if you have stains on the card, that drops the value. But if you get an older card, even with an ink stain on it, of a really scarce type of card to find, it has considerable value. And I'll give you another example. One of the Hall of Famers of the Iowans is Fred Clark, and I have over 60 different Fred Clark cards going back to the late 1800s. But there's one card. It's a company called Bryce Williams, and there was a Fred Clark card about 6 months ago with multiple creases from that set that sold for $23,000. And so, who's on the card is probably the number one factor. The scarcity is the number two factor. Condition is everything. And the condition, not just on newer cards, but on old cards, it's magnitudes of difference. Again, I'll use an example. I have a 1956 Mickey Mantle card, and those routinely sell between $10,000 and $15,000. One that is just 2 grades down, mine is a PSA 8 out of 10. One that is 2 grades down, PSA 6, which is X to mint in terms of condition, that sells for about $1,000, a little bit more than 1,000. That's the difference, 15,000 to 1 with just 2 grades. And with the cards where there's no scarcity, the beat up card doesn't sell for much. So it's who's on the card, the scarcity of the card, the condition of the card, the condition of the set. There's some sets, regional sets, really obscure sets, where if you can find any cards of Mickey Mantle, the value soars even with, a card that's off condition. So there are a lot of considerations. Another card that, I had for a number of years, but I sold it, is in 1954, the Bowman Company had a contract with Ted Williams. And Ted Williams broke his contract after some of those cards had been produced. And the same number in that set went to Jimmy Pearsall. And so the Jimmy Pearsall card today is not worth much, but the Ted Williams card is worth a lot because they short printed it. He broke the contract. And so there are rarities. Sometimes there's printing errors on these cards. Gene Baker from Davenport, Iowa, the first African American to play, he's in the 1957 set. And, his regular card isn't worth a lot, but there was a printing error where it came out Gene Baker. It ended with a P instead of an R. And that error card is worth 10 times the regular card. So there's a lot of variables, but it gets back to a point that I made with you earlier, is that educate yourself, about these about condition and
What baseball card, photo, autograph, etc. means the most to you and why?
and I've said this before, that's not an easy question to answer because there's different reasons why cards mean something to me, but I'll give you two examples. Being a child and a baseball fan of the 1950s, the 1956 set, which I completed, and I had one graded 8 or better. I sold it recently. I kept the Mickey Mantle. All right. That was a childhood set that I loved. And it included Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, Willie Mays, a lot of superstars. Jackie Robinson's in there, Ted Williams is in there, and so on. And but individual cards, I mentioned before that a lot of my presentations I do dressed in a replica uniform of the 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings. And the last player who was hired on that team was Calvin McVeigh from Montrose, Iowa, just north of where you used to live, Keokuk. And Calvin played right field. He ended up having a career of almost 15 years as a player manager. He batted over 400. He played every position. And I have a number of Calvin McVeigh cards, photos, and items. And probably the hardest thing to find, and I'll share with you something I saw on Antique Roadshow about 6 years ago before COVID. A lady from New England in a family estate in an attic had found 9 small cameo cards of the starting players for the Cincinnati Red Stockings, including Calvin McVeigh. And remember, when they do sports memorabilia or other items on Antique Roadshow, they always end with what they would ask you to insure it for minimally. And they said, after she showed those cards, they said, minimally insure those 9 little cards for $1 million. and that's the largest amount I've ever heard for a piece of sports memorabilia. And well, when getting back to my collection,
Wow.
Warner Studios in Boston, after 2 years in Cincinnati, McVeigh was traded to Boston, the Red Stockings, with 3 other players from the Cincinnati team. And I have in a civilian dress, a picture of Calvin McVeigh. Well, what makes mine really, really scarce is it's autographed on the back. And there are only 2 known autographed items of Calvin McVeigh's known to anyone in the hobby. And I have one of them. And yeah, and I do have, there was actually sheet music that was put out for the Cincinnati Red Stockings. It's called the Red Stockings Polka, and it has on the front cover, well, it has a cameo of the first 9 players on it. And I have that. And then the first commercial baseball card was put out by a sporting goods company in New York called Peck and Snyder. And it shows the starting team for the Cincinnati Red Stockings. And I have that in my collection. And that routinely sells between 20,000 on up, depending on the condition. And so the Calvin McVeigh items are truly the scarcest and some of the more valuable items that I have in my collection. I have a lot of Mickey Mantle cards, which are valuable, and I have some really scarce cards. I have a number of Cap Anson cards, one of the other Iowans in the Hall of Fame, and those, even in off condition, are valuable. I think almost anything 19th century of a Hall of Famer is going to be scarce and have value. So that's a little bit about some of the cards.
Is Cap Anson's card still viable considering his views on racial equality? Has that diminished the value of his cards?
No, it hasn't. I think everybody in the hobby is aware, and I've done a number of programs in Marshalltown, and I always have my Cap Anson cards with me. And a lot of people that have lived there most of their lives are not aware of what a racist he was and what he did, basically to segregate and refuse to play against a team from Toledo that had two brothers that were African American on it. But again, in all fairness, not in fairness to Anson, but putting it into historical context, that was the period of Jim Crow laws when it wasn't just baseball that was completely segregated. White boxers wouldn't box against black boxers. You had separate drinking fountains, separate sidewalks, separate schools. Even the Supreme Court ruled in a case in 1894 that separate but equal is okay. So America was racist. And so the mystery sort of about Anson is his father, Henry, was one of the founders of Marshalltown. They didn't have any black families that lived there. So where'd the racism come from? And in people that have done, when they've done the research, a lot of them said that there were still Native Americans that lived in the area. And there's one that's buried in Riverside Cemetery in Marshalltown. And they were considered lower order of human beings. So there was kind of a pecking order. If you were a white European, you were near the top of the totem pole. And if you weren't, you were somewhere below that. And but yeah, I think most people in the hobby, they're aware of why we had to wait for Jackie Robinson in 1947 and why we finally this year allowed Josh Gibson to take his right place in the long pantheon of baseball records.
Yes. So speaking of baseball players, who was your favorite player growing up? I think I know the answer, but tell the audience we have today who your favorite player was and why.
Well, there are two of them for different reasons. And my favorite player, because my life has been, teaching college students, and I still continue to teach adults um, at Drake University at Iowa State, and I do programs for adults. And combining my love of academics and my love of sports, Lou Gehrig, and also being a Yankee fan, and died way too young, of course. And I have a number of Lou Gehrig cards. I've had a number of them over the years, and I have the couple of the Wheaties boxes that he was on, and so on. And the other one, tragic figure, just like Lou Gehrig, Roberto Clemente. Roberto Clemente had, just gotten his 3,000th hit, and then he dies in that plane crash delivering supplies to victims of an earthquake in Nicaragua. I think you can make an argument, and there are a lot of people in baseball world, baseball nerds, that Roberto Clemente, if he had lived, could have easily been the best all-time player. He had a cannon of an arm. He was fast on the bases. I know Joe Posnowski says Willie Mays is, and I don't disagree. But Clemente was a lot like Mays, and with a life that was cut short. But he's one of few players. He may be the only one where they waived the waiting period to get into the Hall of Fame. And so, those are two of, and then I've met some wonderful baseball players over the years. I've met a lot of Hall of Famers. And, when my son, who's in his late 40s now, was playing T-ball, Brooks Robinson came to a small show in Marshalltown. And I told my son, bring your glove. We're going to the show. And we walked into the lobby of the hotel on Highway 30, and there was hardly anyone there. And there's Brooks Robinson sitting there. So my son's playing catch with Brooks Robinson. And he was just a fabulous gentleman. My wife, Diane, shares a birth date with Stan Musial. And I met Stan a number of times. And he personalized a poster of him batting for my wife because they share a birth date. And Stan's gone now, but she hung that behind her desk in her office for years.
Wow.
Because they share a birth date. So I've been fortunate going to shows and traveling around the country to meet a lot of wonderful baseball players. There are some on the other side. You admire them as a kid, and you meet them in person and say, "Whoa, where did all the smiles go?" and one, again, he wasn't very personable. Was Willie Mays. He, as great of a talent as he was, he was not. He did rarely smiled. I'll put it that way.
That's what I've heard. I think I saw Brooks Robinson play the first year, maybe with the Orioles, at a White Sox-Orioles game at Old Comiskey Park. my little league coaches were always White Sox fans, unfortunately, so they would always take us to White Sox games instead of Cub games. So we went to night games. I'm kind of surprised our parents will let us little league coaches take us to a night game at Comiskey Park in the south side of Chicago, but we survived.
Yeah, well, we lived in different times too, and and it was, yeah, there were a lot of things that parents would allow us to do. And I'll give you an example. On Saturday mornings with my brothers when we were kids, after a big breakfast, we headed to the playground and we played baseball, we played tetherball, we, especially during the summer months. And the parents wouldn't see us until evening, until it was getting dark, and then we come home. They didn't worry about us. And now,
Yeah, that's really kind of the way it was. The parents wanted you out of the house, and they didn't really want to see you until lunchtime, and then they wanted you out of the house after that till dinner, and then until bedtime.
yeah, yeah, and now it's almost gone, now it's almost gone too far the other direction, that everything that kids do is supervised by adults, and a lot of them have the totally wrong attitude about letting kids enjoy themselves and play. It's all competition, yelling and screaming.
How many saber conventions have you been to? And do you have a favorite one?
Well, I have a favorite one, and for a personal reason. Answering the first part of your question, I've been to maybe about 8 or 10 over the years, and I don't try to go to all of them. If they're in the Midwest and I don't have anything else on my calendar, I'll go. But a few years ago, I think it was Saber 45. It was in Chicago, and it was at the Palmer House, and I actually prepared a presentation, and it was, you had 20 minutes in concurrent sessions, and I had hundreds of people in the audience for my program, in a big ballroom. And what I did is I educated the room about Calvin McVeigh, that first player from Iowa. And the high point of that presentation at that Saber convention is the official historian of baseball, John Thorne, walked into my presentation, and the guys that introduced me, when they saw Thorne walk in, they said, we have mics in the middle aisle after you're done for people to ask questions. If John Thorne walks to the middle aisle, you're probably in trouble, but he'll be nice, which meaning he probably corrects you a little bit. Well, John Thorne never went to the middle aisle. And so I don't, yeah, I don't forget that. And I was in one in Washington D.C. And our whole family went to one up in Milwaukee at Electric Park. Took in a game up there, and I've been to St. Louis. And one of the highlights down in St. Louis is they had received permission from the National Park Service to play a 1870s rule game under the St. Louis Arch. And there were literally a couple thousand people sitting on the grass watching a baseball game under the arch. And so yeah, I love the conventions, and but sometimes it's pretty overwhelming. I mean, there's so many good people there that know so much. It's like a candy store. You're not sure which one to go to. You can't go to all of them. So
What are your first recollections of attending baseball games in Des Moines? When did you start attending, and was it Pioneer Memorial Stadium then, or Sec Taylor?
well, that one I can answer easily. I'd have to double check, but it was 1956. I was 11 years old, and I've told this story to a lot of people. The Des Moines Register and Tribune, then they had a Tribune, an evening paper, and we all carried it. So there was a day at the ballpark for paper boys, and it was free. You didn't have to pay. And because my parents didn't have a lot of money, we usually took advantage. I think Riverview Park, which used to be by North High School, they did something similar where you had a free day for paper boys. And so I went there to watch the Des Moines Bruins play. And the best part of that is that I still have the baseball cards from the team that played when I went to see my first game there. They're really scarce, and they were put out by Old Homestead Frakes. And I think the police department issued the baseball card. And Pepper Martin was the coach, who played for the Cardinals, and so on. And I think there were one or two others that made it up to the majors. But I have never forgotten that. And and then once I started in college, I didn't go very often. But when we moved to Indianola, I started coming. When we lived in Ames for 18 years, I didn't come to very many games. It was a question of distance and time, and busy with teaching. But when we moved to Indianola, that was a lot closer, so I started coming to more. And then when we moved 7 years ago to West Des Moines and Des Moines, I go all the time now. when I go tonight, it'll be my, I think, 18th home game this season. I try and catch between 25 and 30 home games a season. And I love going down to that ballpark. And even though I'm a Yankee fan in the major leagues, I root for the Iowa Cubs.
Yeah, you better. Yeah, 56, that would have been Pioneer Memorial Stadium. They didn't name it Chuck Taylor until 59.
Okay.
59. So, yeah, so you were in on the original stadium.
Yeah.
How did that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Michael Gardner tells the story that one of his first memories of going to ball games is when his father took him to that ballpark in 1948.
That's like a year after it opened. Yeah. How did that ball feel compared to Principal Park now? Or is there any comparison?
Oh, there's no comparison. Oh, no. No. Now, Principal Park's a gem today. And it's still, for a AAA team, it's easy to get to. Parking, how many ballparks have valet parking for bicycles? And it's within walking distance of so many young people that live downtown now. And, that whole riverfront area has turned Des Moines into a really nice, attractive place for younger people. And the ballpark's part of the mix. So,
who are some of the best players you've ever seen here in Des Moines?
Well, both players and managers. I've got to think here. I've seen so many of them.
Of course, there's Vita Blue and those guys from the.
Yeah, Vita Blue. Vita Blue used to drink. Vita Blue used to be a regular drinking beer out in Polk City, and, and Tony La Russa was a really nice guy to talk to and visit with, and even what's his name for the Phillies now, the home run slugger. Schwarber. Yeah, he was a great guy, and he would chat with you. We were sitting down by home plate sometimes, and I'm trying to think recently, but they're colorful characters. Like was it Turk Wendell? Really colorful guy. He had all these superstitions and so on, and of course a number of the Cubs. I'm trying to think that were here briefly. Sandberg was here briefly as a player manager. Some of the others that came through here, and then the guest appearances. When Willie Mays died a couple of weeks ago, in my collection, I have the newspaper account and the programs of when Willie Mays, Roger Maris, Rocky Colavito, and Orlando Cepeda played in front of 7,000 fans in the ballpark here in Des Moines in exhibition games. I have the programs. One of the games, 42 players played in the game. And so I wasn't, I didn't see the games, but I do have the newspaper clippings, the headline from the sports section. So
yeah, I've tried. Yeah.
There are a lot of I would have to go back and kind of check a list, but a lot of good players came through here. And with one of the problems with AAA is, and you're well aware of this, I think Michael Gardner said that they cycle in and out about 80 players a year. And if you look at the starting players on opening night this year, I was there. None of them are starting now. And I think the Chicago Cubs start 6 or 7 of the guys that were in Des Moines early on. Now, some come back either because of injuries or they just don't stay up there. And David Bodie's been back and forth so many times. I don't know where his family lives.
Well, I heard he has a place here and a place in Chicago, so I don't know. You're speaking of Tony La Russa, by the way. So this
he'd almost have to, because I think he's got 2 or 3 little kids.
A woman I interviewed for the book who I played pickleball with, or did, she moved now, but she babysat for Tony La Russa's kids when she was going to Iowa State and then AIB back in the 70s. And so she's in the book relating her experiences working for the team and babysitting Tony La Russa's kids.
Yeah, which I think kind of reinforces the atmosphere here in Des Moines with the iCubs, and they're close to the community. The community's close with them, and a lot of people know. I think Sam Bernaba was telling me that maybe it was Sam, maybe it was Scott Saylor. I asked one day about how many people work when they have a home game. He said 200. and you were one part of that, you're being an usher. But a lot of people that go to games, they have no idea that there are that many people. Obviously, most of them during the season, but and I think Michael created this family atmosphere too among the people, a certain kind of a loyalty. And then, of course, it made national headlines when Michael sold the team that he prorated and gave bonuses to anyone who had worked there a number of years, which that made the New York Times. It was just a wonderful gesture.
Yeah, that was amazing. I was going to say, lost my train of thought. Oh, well. Oh, what's the most memorable game you've ever seen in Des Moines that you yourself have seen?
Probably when Des Moines made the playoffs, and we were there in the fall. And here again, you sort of caught me off guard when I can't think of his name, when he hit the home run to win the game, a walk-off home run, and they won the championship.
Oh, yeah. Tuffy Rhodes. Tuffy Rhodes, 1993.
Yeah, we were there. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the crowd wasn't big because school had started and everything else, but they just went nuts. And then I was there when Kerry Wood, I think, struck out 20 players, 19 or 20, and that was one of them. And there are some others too. I'm trying to think but those two come to mind immediately.
So you were there that night that Tuffy Rhodes hit the home run, huh?
I was there.
Game running home run, yeah, boy. Yeah, the write-ups from the Register the next day were something else.
I was there. Yeah. Well, we had a group of people here in Des Moines. A lot of them are retired educators now and avid bicyclists. But we used to come as a group to every opening iCubs game. And a lot of times, a little story I share with people, a lot of times it was about 34 degrees, and we would be in parkas with hand warmers. And one time we were tailgating by the river, and we brought a little hibachi grill to make brats on, and it started snowing, and so we're warming our hands up on the hibachi grill, and they started the game. I don't remember if they finished it, but it was cold.
Yeah, that's the problem with starting baseball in the spring in the Midwest. So, like I've asked some others, if you hadn't pursued a career in education, what else do you think you would have done?
I have my granddaughter visiting right now from suburban Washington D.C., and she asked me the same question, and my answer was, I was a Boy Scout as a kid, I Eagle Scout, and I grew up in this family. We hunted, we fished, we camped, we canoed, and when I was in college, I got involved on a number of environmental issues. We tried to change when they built the Saylorville Dam, how they would control the flooding and so on. And we lost the battle against the Army Corps, but we learned a lot about the Army Corps and dam siting and what alternatives there were. And we also helped to stop a nuclear power plant from being built right by Des Moines. And so, to answer your question, probably something relating to the environment. I probably would have done that. I always loved biology. I love the outdoors. I still do. I'm an avid runner. I run a lot of trails, and I ran a lot of marathons. But when I go on vacation, wherever we're vacationing, if it's along a lake or something, I go out and run. I see deer all the time. Here in the Raccoon River Valley Park, I run on the trails down. I was there this morning, and I try and avoid people. Well, somebody once suggested that long distance runners that run trails, they have a PhD in avoiding people, and so during COVID, it was just perfect. We knew how to stay away from people. So yeah, probably something related.
You didn't have any problems with COVID, did you?
I've never had it. I've never had it. I mean, we were careful, and I believe in science.
Well, yeah, and I think this is still true. You've run every day for decades, haven't you, from what I've heard?
Yeah, there's a website called runeveryday.com. And when I got into running, it was because of a rugby injury at Iowa State. And I was worried about permanent damage to one of my legs. And I had part of a kneecap removed and so on. And I was in a cast. And so I started running and found out that I had pretty good VO2 capacity for running long distances. And I ran my first marathon at the age of 30 at the University of Kansas Relays. But my running streak, I never intended to have a running streak. It started on January 1st of 1977, and I haven't missed a day of running since then. And there is a website, runeveryday.com, and there are rules. It's all based on the honor system. You have to run a minimum of 1 mile without any ambulatory support of any kind. But a lot of the guys, I've run for over 47 years without missing a day. And I know some of the guys above me. I'm number 8 in the country, longest running streaks. And Steve DeBoer, who's a friend of mine, he works up at Mayo Clinic as a dietitian. He's number 3. Steve's run over 50 years without missing a day. And but he's got a website, I think it's called Traversing the Tundra. And he runs bare chested till it's down to about 35 degrees. So a lot of these guys are really they're good runners. Some are NCAA champions. Some of them, ran competitively in college and so on. So it's a way of life. You habituate it, and it's never a question of if you're going to run. It's just how good will it be that day. And I ran 18 marathons and over 250 road races when I was running competitively. I ran competitively for about 25 years, and I was a race director of a race called Midnight Madness up in Ames, Iowa. And my kids my wife's run marathons, my kids have run marathons. So it was just something we grew up with, is running. So.
Well, thanks, John, for spending part of your day with us. I know at least I've heard you're going to the Iowa Cub game tonight. I certainly hope they have better results in the last 2 days. They've been outscored, I think, 27-8, something like that.
It's well, I don't want to jinx them anymore, but yeah, I'm going to be brave and go and cheer loud for the first few innings at least. I usually make up my mind about the 8th inning if it's worth staying for the last 2.
Well, believe it or not, I did stay for the whole game yesterday. There weren't too many of us left when it was 14-3, but whatever.
Yeah.
So I'll tell my audience here, I'll have a book signing, by the way, coming up Saturday, August 3rd at the Barnes & Noble in West Des Moines. That's the one on University, not the one at Jordan Creek Town Center. It's the one on University. And then August 29th, Thursday, August 29th, from 4:30 to 6:30, I'll be at, get this right here. It's a new place, In Tandem Arts and Authors Gallery and Bookstore. It's in the plaza at 3rd and Walnut in downtown Des Moines. I didn't know that place existed, but one of my pickleball friends gave me a brochure about the place and said, hey, you ought to ask them if they'd like to work with you on your book. So they are. They're even going to serve root beer floats. So go have a root beer float. I'll sign the book. And then you can go to the Iowa Cubs are playing the Memphis Redbirds the same night. So, you can make two things at one night. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope to see a lot of people there. So in addition to today's podcast with John, future episodes will feature Sam Burnaby, President and General Manager of the Iowa Cubs. I interviewed him Tuesday. Randy Wayhofer, I'm going to talk to him Friday. And then I'm trying to get Alex Cohen and hopefully Michael Gardner on here too. So in the next few weeks, we'll explore Des Moines baseball even further, and hope you enjoy these podcasts. I'm just starting out doing this, so let me know what you think of them.